And I'm Guy, and this is your home for everything Alberta independence. A ton of news today. It's probably going to be a little bit longer of a show, I think.
Yes, but thank you so much for joining us today. Please don't forget to subscribe. Again, it is what helps us out the most. Thank you so much to everybody that has subscribed recently. Also, we try to read most, if not all, of your comments live, depending on how many we get. Thank you so much. And we do want you to be involved in the conversation and telling us what you think. We do prioritize super chats, so we read those first. And we also have memberships. Please don't forget to... Thank you so much to our members. There we go.
Let's get into it.
Sure. Shaunavision says, good evening. Good evening, Shaunavision. Thank you for being here. And Silverfeet waves. So waving back, Silverfeet, hello. And that's it. So I guess we can... Happy Monday, by the way, to everybody. Hope you're having a good one.
Let's get into Alberta Stay Free if we can.
Yes. So let's start with this from Ryan Gertison that says, quote, front page of the Globe, the propaganda is real. Saying, quote, you are at war when you get attacked, we got attacked.
Yeah, and this is just pure propaganda coming out from the Canadian media, trying to get everybody's elbows up, whether you're liberal, even conservatives. We got to have a Team Canada approach. Everybody kind of hears that. Mark Carney does not have Canadians' best interests at heart. He has globalist best interests at heart. If the economic situation of Canada falls apart, that's good for Mark Carney because that will lead way to federalization. A lot of provinces will be in hard times asking for bailouts. And what is Mark Carney going to provide? He's going to provide those bailouts, but in exchange for federalization, I believe.
And they've also continued to ramp up this rhetoric more and more and further as the weekend went on after that last minute decision to pull out of a trade deal made basically solely by Carney. And we'll continue to talk more about that. But also with new and more information coming up about what might be the real causes behind why they didn't want to continue in the trade deal.
Well, I don't think it's the real causes. The mainstream media is always going to pitch it's this issue or that issue. My belief is this was intentional right from the beginning. The midterms are coming up. Mark Carney is the puppet of the globalist. They want to put as much hurt on America as they can, even if it is just a little bit. They want to do every single thing to take the power that Trump does have. That being said, I mean, Carney is going to be in a tough situation here. We'll see. We'll kind of see what happens.
But also, and within Alberta, I hope that more and more people are looking towards the October 19th non-binding referendum first and voting to actually have that second referendum and be able to finally leave this insanity. CTV News Calgary says, quote, separation referendum vote moving ahead despite revival of trade war tensions with U.S., says Daniel Smith. Not despite, but because of, I would say, or increasingly more because of this.
Well, you have to understand, this is obviously being planted in the mainstream media. And she says, yeah, it's going to go on. Obviously, it's going to go on. But why is this here? Because if this trade war goes on for an extended amount of time and Canada really has economic hurt put upon them, they can declare the Emergencies Act or any number of other things. They could completely avoid the second referendum, and the second referendum is the binding referendum. This is the narrative they want to build now. They want to build it early. We can't let them do it. We have a counter move to their move. If they want to take the binding referendum away, what we can do is declare a unilateral declaration of independence. We deserve to have a vote on a binding referendum if we should leave Canada, especially because we've been given an extra hurdle of a non-binding referendum.
And also now everybody is looking towards Alberta because of the threats with oil and cutting off or bringing more and etc. Because Alberta Proud Dad says, quote, oh, now Alberta energy matters. Quote, for 10 years, Trudeau's Liberals blocked pipelines, banned tankers, and demonized Alberta oil and gas, and Carney refuses to reverse any of it. But now Ottawa needs leverage, and suddenly Alberta's energy is useful. They don't respect Alberta, they use Alberta, and they'll continue to do so.
Yeah, there is a ton of talk about using the potash from Saskatchewan, oil and natural gas from Alberta to put a hurt on the Americans in this tariff war. If they do that, it's only going to cut off Canada's nose in order to spite their face. The Americans have far more leverage. All those pipelines run into the United States. A matter of fact, I believe in our next segment, we're going to go into this in depth. Doug Ford definitely got the attention of Trump and not in a good way.
Because he's retarded.
Yeah.
And I did like Trump's message back. But City News Toronto says, quote, Pierre Poilievre wants Prime Minister to reconvene Parliament to discuss the rejected trade deal. And sorry, once again, too little, too late.
Well, this is a good thing especially for Alberta independents. If they don't show what was in the trade deal, it was obvious, it was secretive, it was meant to be secretive. They have a monopoly on the mainstream media in Canada. The benefit to having secret negotiations is they can tell the general public whatever they want, and that's the narrative that's going to be writ unless the Americans leak some things out, which they have. Thank God we're getting an insider's view of why this thing really kind of fell apart. I hope they keep pushing this. I actually hope things come out more and more. Do I think it will actually happen? No. Mark Carney has a majority government. As underhanded as it was to get that majority government, he has it now. So he doesn't really have to do anything Poilievre is requesting here, which is a damn shame.
Exactly. And also, not just the Americans coming out, but a while ago, the Mexicans even coming out and saying, hey, Canadians are not coming to the table. They're not going into the formal negotiations that we should all be going into as well. And that we are already on the now 4th round coming up in September.
Well, that's kind of been the two different strategies. Claudia Sheinbaum is a far left ideologue. She's the president of Mexico, but she took the opposite strategy of what Carney took. She had open negotiations with daily readings of what was in those negotiations. She almost immediately went into official negotiations, unlike Canada, who never entered into official negotiations. This is important because they were able to put a mechanism in there called a standstill. You can also put a snapback in there. I believe with the Mexican negotiations, only a standstill was put in there. And what that allows is for the Mexicans not to be threatened by future tariffs as long as they're in negotiations.
Which would have really helped Canada in this case. But also with all of this talk of the trade with the US, of the trade war, the interprovincial trade stuff is also coming up. And a lot of Canadians, I think, forgot that that is still a fact and that still hasn't been fixed. Harrison Faulkner says, quote, daily reminder that Canadian self-imposed interprovincial trade barriers caused the country $200 billion in lost economic output. And Mark Carney had promised to deliver interprovincial free trade by July 1st of last year, 2025.
Yeah, you may be looking for July 1st of this upcoming year. The only reason I can see Mark Carney pulling out of these trade deals is to go towards federalization. Federalization would make trade barriers disappear, but it would put the federal government in the power player position and give them more power bestowed upon them by each individual province. And that would be round one. If economic collapse continued to happen, he could ask for more and more federalization for more and more bailouts.
So it could be that this economic stress that is happening because of the trade downfall with the US could be a mechanism that actually helps in the end to achieve goals that I guess many Canadians aren't really privy to yet or realized yet. But next you had a cartoon. It says, so Quebec's hardline on French language rules and dairy helped sink Canada's trade deal.
Well, actually, this is a fantastic channel. I highly recommend everybody go like and subscribe to this. Actually, one of the viewers told me about it. I was watching a few videos, but then this one popped up and I said, oh, this is a good opportunity to put this on the show because this is exactly what's happening in Canada now. Absolutely ridiculousness with the Laurentian elites in Ottawa working hand in hand to handicap the West. And Alberta specifically. And they bring up Alberta in this little clip.
It's called Satire Squad, the channel.
Mark, we almost had a trade deal.
Until you attacked Canadian sovereignty.
We question Quebec's mandatory French labeling.
Exactly. Canadian sovereignty.
But 9 provinces don't require Quebec-style labels.
Apparently, Quebec is now all of Canada.
French labeling protects Quebec culture.
Then Quebec businesses can pay for it.
That's not how Canada works.
How does Canada work?
Quebec creates the expensive rule.
Okay,
The rule becomes a national trade problem.
Naturally.
Then Ottawa announces supports.
there's that magic word.
Supports means taxpayer money, right?
It means protecting affected industries.
Mostly industries concentrated in Quebec.
That's an unfair characterization.
Is it inaccurate?
We'll release the details later.
Let me guess, Alberta produces the money.
Ottawa transfers the money.
Quebec receives the money,
That's Canadian unity.
Quebec gets its special rules.
then sends the bill to everyone else.
We're defending the French language.
No, you're nationalizing Quebec's invoice.
Quebec wanted the label.
Quebec helped kill the deal,
Quebec gets the supports.
see, and every Canadian gets the bill.
We all have to make sacrifices.
Somehow, Quebec's sacrifice always comes with direct deposit,
Paid for in both official languages.
English and Albertan.
Okay, and you can leave it there. But absolutely fantastic little cartoon of satire that has a ton of truth behind it. I see a ton of videos out there talking about how the deal fell apart because Mark Carney wanted to protect the French language. Absolutely BS. Americans don't want to have to pay for the labeling to put French on there. That's a Canadian cost if the Canadian government wants to protect the French language, period. And you're not going to put these costs on the person trying to do business in the country.
But also, that also just might be an excuse. And the whole French language thing might be hiding something even deeper that doesn't go, well, that goes further east.
Well, let's talk about this for a minute because shockingly, the PQ, which is the Independence Party in Quebec, now says they're not going to have a referendum until after Trump is out of office. Oh, magically that just happens, and Mark Carney and now the PQ and everybody else in Quebec seems to be attached at the hip. Now, if you think Mark Carney has Quebec's best interest at heart to save their culture and everything else, you're sadly mistaken. He's going to make them think that to avoid a referendum on independence. And then what's going to happen? 2027 going into 2028, you're going to see mass immigration. And I think you're going to see a lot of people with PR status in Quebec fast-tracked into full citizenship. And that is going to deteriorate the culture of Quebec, if anything.
Especially if they don't know French, because apparently it's so important. But lastly, and unsurprisingly, obviously, Rise of Alberta says, quote, shocking poll. I think this is the least shocking poll ever. Says nearly half of young Canadians say they would vote to join the USA and become American under the conditions presented by Ipsos. And yes, 43% of young Canadians would vote to join the USA and become American.
Well, and this is actually really good news for Alberta independence, not because we want to become American or the 51st state. We want to be a free and independent nation. But if young Canadians are willing to vote to join the United States, they're definitely willing to join to vote for independence of a free and independent Alberta, not just in Alberta, but across the nation. And once we get to that binding referendum and they see that there's real hope in Alberta to break free and start our own nation, they will start the great migration to Alberta to vote for freedom, I believe.
And I think the rhetoric of, oh, Canada is much better than the USA, and Canada, we're great because we're just not the USA, is maybe breaking away from the young people and hasn't been as enshrined into them as the rest of the older ones.
Well, I think we're on a whole nother level here. I think we've kind of hit the breaking point for young people in Canada and a lot of people in Canada. And because Alberta has a referendum for independence and can break free and become its own independent nation, it has a freaking safety net there. If everything goes wrong and they completely fail, which shouldn't happen because they have every economic advantage of their natural resources, but let's just say everything went wrong, they have the safety net of the United States right there who would gladly take them. And I would rather be part of the US than Canada at this point. But the first choice, obviously, is to be your own free and independent nation and to make that work.
And I mean, deep down, and because the US is so close, it's not that hard to see how much better life would be over there if you do comparisons of, oh, I'm looking for a house somewhere in Canada versus somewhere in the US. So I'm looking at what people get paid in the US. I'm looking at the healthcare that is free, but not free. The fact that I might be paying or will be paying 40% in taxes, it compounds. And as much as the rhetoric of, oh, we're not the US is horrible, reality starts to sink in, I think.
I don't think it's reality. People would much rather be part of the U.S., but the thing is, I would rather start an independent nation that's even better than the U.S. with zero taxes. I know the APP put their new constitution forward and it said 10% taxes. I say zero, and I think a lot of people say zero, especially with the amount of natural resource wealth Alberta has. Any other nation with even half that amount of wealth has no taxes on their citizens. So there should be no reason for taxes on individual citizens. Only middle and large-sized businesses and natural resources should be taxed. That's more than enough money to build the infrastructure we need to build a nation there. We can be even better than the United States. And eventually, if the Democrats get back into office in the United States, which I God forbid happens, I don't wish that upon anybody, but if they do, a lot of Americans may be going to Alberta if they're a free and independent nation. Alberta has voted conservative for the last 93 years.
Yes, and has that consistency. But now let's head into your comments. But before before we do, don't forget to subscribe. Again, it is what really helps us out. But I love to read your comments. So 416 Shaunavision says, another messy day in Canada, guys. Oh, yes. And it'll continue to be so forever, I would say. We'll have a lot to talk about, I think.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I'm watching a lot of stations right now in Alberta independents and conservatives, and they're saying, oh, Mark Carney's going to enter back into negotiations really quick here. He kind of has to. No, he doesn't. Not if the plan is federalization. He wants economic collapse for Canada so we can also offer handouts or bailouts for federalization. That's the thing. The Americans are pissed. Also, this happens right before the midterms. Do you think that's just an accident? And they do it very, very publicly?
Mm-hmm. Primors 007 says, hola Nat y Guy, another exciting day in China. Not. Soon, hopefully, won't be there anymore.
Well, the one section we have today is pretty much all stories about how Canada has its allegiance with China. And I didn't even know some of the statistics. They're moving fast as they can away from America and into Europe and China's arms.
Mm-hmm. Working around, hello, says, hey, Nan and the Guy, Alberta independent. Mm-hmm. More important now than ever, I would say. Primors 007 says, we are under occupation by stupidity and retardation. Yeah.
But we have all the momentum on our side. The only thing I'm worried about is all the underhanded tricks that are going into having 10 questions. We don't have enough poll workers. There needs to be 60,000 poll workers. We have to hire from outside of Alberta, possibly non-citizens. Forever Canada, not showing their money. All these things are extremely, extremely concerning. We've played everything on the up and up. We have all the momentum in our court now, especially with Mark Carney dooming Canada for economic collapse here.
Mm-hmm. Reckon Around also says the government has an unlimited supply of newly printed money. The Canadian peso enters the chat. And they'll continue to do so, I think, as well, if the plan is to go for full-on federalization, which is essentially just communism at this point, and starting to look into a UBI and into keeping the Canadians more comfortable so they don't notice what's really happening. Primors 007 says, if the vote goes the way of independence, I am sure some BS will get in the way. I doubt there will be a binding referendum, which is why we do have to start looking towards a unilateral declaration of independence and having that in the back pocket.
Well, absolutely. And the only way to do that is going to be to get rid of Danielle Smith. She's not going to allow a binding referendum to happen. She'll schedule it and then she'll say, oh, there's a court challenge or there's some other kind of challenge. We can't do it. It's going to be 2.5 to 3 years like her original statement was. We need a leadership review on Danielle Smith shortly after this non-binding referendum, and we need somebody in there that's going to guarantee a binding referendum come hell or high water.
Mm-hmm. Option Trader says, I come in peace. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you for being here. Option Trader also says, when a person has a mindset tied to their self-worth, you absolutely can't reason with them. I support Alberta independence, but anti-Americanism is the biggest roadblock. And in Alberta, I mean, there is more of a connection there with the U.S., and there is more friendliness and more similarities, even, I would say, even in mindset. But yes, unfortunately, there are still some, even within Alberta independence, that are very anti-USA.
Well, it's absolutely crazy that on a federal level, when it comes to Doug Ford, Mark Carney, they're talking about weaponizing Alberta oil. And part of the problem is, now I did make a mistake and I want to make a little bit of a correction. There is one pipeline that actually is a very small pipeline. It doesn't pump a lot of oil to the United States, but it does go directly from Alberta to the United States. The major pipelines, on the other hand, they all go through other provinces. So even if Alberta doesn't want to cut off the oil to the United States, the federal government is going to have a far bigger say in the matter than I think Alberta is, which is a damn shame there, especially because all those pipelines end up leading to Eastern Canada, and the Americans can turn them off just as easy as the Canadians can.
Yeah. Talks, hello, says, howdy again, Nat and Guy. Hello, thank you for being here. Freedom Calendar, Max from Freedom Calendar. Go subscribe to him if you haven't done so yet. He does a lot of recording events and essentially becoming a history book for Alberta independence, but says, as somebody who used to live in Quebec, I'm so tired of their politics, and I'm sure you're really tired of French as well.
Yeah, I mean, Quebec is just looking so shady right now. For a long time, I was reaching out to people in Quebec, talking about the Quebec Quebec independence movement, kind of pumping the PQ a little bit. It looked like a little bit of hope, but Alberta has really shown why you don't put your faith in politicians. You have a grassroots, decentralized movement. It's the people that are going to make the change. You don't wait 3 years to vote harder for a Poilievre or anybody else. The people can make the change now. We can get independence now. We see what happens when you put your faith in a politician. We've seen what happened with Pierre Poilievre. We're seeing what's happening with the PQ right now. Now there's not going to be a referendum. They said, vote PQ, and we're going to make sure by the end of the year, there's going to be a referendum. That's no longer the case.
Exactly. Option Trader says Quebec is driving the bus up there, and these talks broke down over two things. One, Quebec dairy cartel, and two, importing Chinese electronics and materials that we ban in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of theories out there, and I think the allegiance to China definitely plays a big role here. But ultimately, I don't think Mark Carney wanted a deal at all. I think he wants federalization. He wants hard times for Canada. Hard times means more power for the federal government. As strained as an economic situation Canada is in right now, no provinces are going to the federal government for a bailout or anything like that. But shortly they will be, especially if there's no solution on the horizon. And I think the Americans are going to be real pissed at this one, especially pulling this underhanded trick just before the midterms in a very public way.
Yeah. And Freedom Calendars just says Canada is effed. Yeah. And Beulah Hillier, hello, says, hi, everyone watching from Innisfail, Alberta. Thank you so much for being here. And quickly over on RUMBLE, I'll just say hello to KP for you that says, good day, Nat and Guy, Alberta Independence. Let's go.
Well, and I'll say one thing, as bad as the economic outlook looks for Canada, this is absolutely fantastic for Alberta. A lot of the people that would have voted to stay in Canada are probably questioning their allegiance right now. Even if they won't vote for Alberta independence, they're definitely probably not going to go out to vote to stay in Canada right now, especially if they're living in Alberta and the federal government's talking about weaponizing Alberta's oil.
And exactly, with all this talk of the trade talks and the trade war and Mark Carney pausing and halting the trade negotiations, well, now Alberta is even further on the map because there's this talk of halting oil production or halting oil going to the U.S. So let's get into Alberta politics.
Free old Alberta, where the roots run deep and the money trees grow.
Press the wrong button. Let's get into Alberta politics.
He doesn't discuss federal politics. He only concerns himself with Alberta's independence.
And let's start with this from Rebel News, saying Canadian Prime Minister saying, quote, the U.S.'s narrow merchandise trade deficit only exists because the U.S. buys so much of its energy from Canada. I don't think they want us to stop sending any of that energy.
Well, and I think these are empty threats, and what he's applying here would basically cut off Canada's nose to spite their face. This whole section has a ton of stories, and it all kind of relates to Alberta's oil. I mean, I'm shocked that the Canadian federal government thinks they control Alberta energy sector. And I think on October 19th, Alberta's going to say, nay, we control it. We want independence. We want to be a free and independent nation.
Another prominent justification for U.S. tariffs has been their claim that since the United States runs, quote, a trade deficit with Canada, we were ripping them off. Also a quote. But the U.S.'s narrow merchandise trade deficit only exists because the U.S. buys so much of its energy from Canada. Canada fuels American growth, supplying 99% of their natural gas imports, 85% of their electricity imports, 60% of their crude oil imports. I don't think they want us to stop sending any of that energy.
And we have another clip later on where he's going to be bragging in a bar, talking about a similar situation, which are just absolute lies. Now, Canada has had a failure to launch here. They tried to diversify their economy, and he went around the world and he wasn't able to do that because what other economies want from Canada is access to the U.S. market. America, on the other hand, has begun to diversify their energy sector with the exact same kind of oil Canada provides through Venezuela. And if Canada wanted to turn off the oil taps or the natural gas taps, America would just lower some of the restrictions on Russia, open up that oil resource, or make a deal directly with the Iranians for the Strait of Hormuz, which again would be more oil. America has the ability to diversify their trading partners, not just with their friends, but also with their enemies, because they're working with so much money and such a large market.
And yet for Canada, the US is imperative and essentially its biggest and almost only customer. Even if you think about the fact that Canada is pretty much as close to the US as anybody can be, but as far from anybody else that actually wants anything from Canada as can be. And yet we have premiers like Doug Ford saying even more stupid things like this. From Rebel News says, quote, Premier Ford tells Trump to kiss my behind. After Prime Minister Carney walked away from a trade agreement, the Ontario leader then demands Alberta and Saskatchewan charge more for energy exports to the US, calling Trump an arrogant, cocky, and a bully.
Well, and this is absolutely insane. And there's rumors that he's going to have a phone call with Danielle Smith talking about how are they going to leverage Alberta's natural resources. Danielle Smith has made it fairly clear she doesn't want a trade war. She wants zero trade. She wants zero tariffs on the United States if possible. A lot of what the United States is doing right now is affecting Ottawa, not Alberta. Why don't you have Ottawa use their leverage?
Exactly. But let's listen.
Well, he can kiss my ass as far as I'm concerned. We're going to go at him full steam. And we buy 400% more cars than anyone in the world. Maybe I have an idea. We'll get Danielle Smith on board so the cars that they're manufacturing won't be able to fill up because we'll be controlling the oil and the gas going down there. And maybe what we should be doing is charging him triple on the oil, triple on the potash, on the uranium, on our metals and our rare earth metals. That's what we need to do. We need to throw everything in the kitchen sink at him. He's arrogant. He's cocky. And, as Ronald Reagan said, if you come to a draw with a bully, what stops that bully from coming after you the next day and the next day? And that's all Donald Trump is a bully. Well, he's going to have a rude awakening. I'm going to throw everything in the kitchen sink. Like I said, he might as well call up the Energizer Bunny because he should be powering his facilities. Isn't this amazing, Bill? How we send them the power manufacturing facilities to go against our country. That's like America sending Iran weapons. It's ridiculous.
And all this tough talk is going to do nothing for Doug Ford. They want to talk like this. The Americans have 10 times the leverage. They're like a gnat on their shoulder. No puns intended, Nat, but...
Like a little chihuahua barking at a big dog, and we've already shown that meme before during our show, but... It's insane that they think that they have this much leverage over a country that can diversify and has already started to differently than Canada has not.
But
Canada has stalled.
I kind of started out this segment with Mark Carney's threats about oil, natural gas, and the energy sector, which we all know lies in Alberta. And then we have Doug Ford there. And there's been multiple other premiers. Those are just the biggest two. That's why I use them as the example. But let's keep going here, because if Canada actually does this, and this is their long-term plan, it's going to mean devastation, not only for all of Canada, but for Alberta as well. Alberta normally wouldn't turn off the oil taps, but because all those pipelines go through other provinces, it could be a huge impact on the Alberta economy if the federal government starts weighing in.
And as Keith Wilson says, it's Alberta's oil, not Canada's oil, and that has already been signed, but apparently we completely forgot about that. However, IQ589 says, quote, picture of how Canada gets oil from Alberta to Ontario and Quebec. Canadians are talking about, quote, cutting off the U.S. from Canadian petroleum and natural gas. What they will end up doing is cutting Canada off from Alberta's petroleum and natural gas.
Absolutely. Now, the problem here is if that Alberta pipeline went directly into the United States, the federal government have very little say on it. But if they declare the Emergencies Act or any number of other mechanisms they have at their disposal, they're going to be able to turn off those pipelines. The problem is all those pipelines go to the United States and then they go back into Eastern Canada where the Laurentian elites and Ottawa lies. What are they going to do? Cut off oil to their own voting base?
Well, I mean, I guess they could increase interprovincial trade and try to truck it over, which would be even a more stupid idea than this one is.
Well, the Americans have pointed this out multiple times. They've said, if you want to cut off oil, we have the ability to cut off oil just as much as you do. All your pipelines run through us, buddy.
Exactly. But also, speaking of Alberta and Danielle Smith, apparently she's not so much on board. It might be a strategy of playing good cop, bad cop. We'll see if her eyes are set on Ottawa, as we believe. But Stephen Taylor says, quote, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith comes out against retaliatory tariffs against the United States, understands the emotional rush of retaliation. emotional being the key word there, worries about an effect on Canadian consumers.
Yeah, and I absolutely love her statement here, and I love her stance that we're not going to go into a tariff war with the United States. The problem, she doesn't hold the leverage. The federal government holds the leverage here. And as more and more province get on board with federalization, because Carney's going to be making bailout payments and things like that, we're going to have to see how this kind of meshes up. I think Alberta is going to be one of the last provinces they're able to break, but eventually they're going to go after them. And all they would have to do is cut off the oil to the United States, because that is ultimately the majority of the revenue Alberta has at this moment.
And magic up a way to not let people fully become independent.
Well, one more thing. This is probably the best reason for Albertans to vote for independence on October 19th. So Mark Carney can't use Alberta as leverage.
Exactly.
The retaliatory tariffs, I know emotionally it feels good to retaliate. I get that. But let's remember what happens when we retaliate. When retaliation happens, it means that everybody who is buying products from the United States are now going to face upwards of 50%, upwards to 50% tariffs. And they're talking about that being on steel, on dairy, on appliances, on agriculture equipment. That one worries me a lot. The retaliatory tariffs.
Well, now as the Canadian economy gets worse and worse, and if potentially they do use Alberta oil and natural gas as a leverage point, we can vote for independence. We have a way out. We don't have to take it. We need to send a message to Ottawa on this first referendum, because that puts the pressure on Ottawa, knowing we are willing to break free until we get to that binding referendum, saying you don't use our oil and natural gas for leverage on our number one trading partner. The future without Canada looks like a good trade deal with the United States, a good relationship with the United States, and a strong, free, and independent nation called Alberta.
Well, and what Canada wasn't able to do, and even becoming a mirror for what Canada could have been doing and becoming and making negotiations on, if it wasn't because of the potential further plans that Mark Carney has to go into full-on communism, in my opinion.
Well, and again, it's a damn shame. Danielle Smith has made it very clear. She wants direct negotiations with the Americans. She does not want to make enemies of them. She does not want to leverage oil and natural gas or turn that off in any way, shape, or form. But she's not going to have a say on it. It's Mark Carney that ultimately is going to have the say. And Mark Carney is a globalist. That's who he's putting first, not the Canadian people.
Mm-hmm. And lastly, we've played this clip quite a few times, but it is very important to understand how all of these trade negotiations F-ups came to be. CBC Watcher says, quote, "Lots here. It's a wake-up call, well worth a listen." And this is Barry Appleton, a professor specializing in international negotiations and trade, talking about this even before the news came out.
And I've played this a few times, but it's crucially important. I actually got it in a debate online today about our last episode, saying, well, this isn't the case. A standstill or a snapback is just a gentleman's agreement. It's actually not written into the contract. No, it is written into the contract. I actually gave sources and references during that debate, and eventually they ended up agreeing with me. The Mexicans entered into official negotiations and put a standstill clause within the contract so they weren't subject to any threats of tariffs. The Canadians never entered into official negotiations. That's why they were subject to threats of tariffs. And that's why Canada is in the situation it is now. Mexico is also on its fourth round, or going into its fourth round of negotiations.
And yet Carney said he was a master negotiator and that he would get this done as soon as he came in. And yet here we are.
The U.S. has been putting leverage on Canada to extract as much as it can. Last summer, they extracted from us too. We had to give up the digital services tax, the DST. We got nothing in return. We were supposed to have talks. We got nothing. This time, we thought, I think, that we were going to get a delay and not have to pay. Clearly, we've had to pay something. We don't know what it is. So at the end of the day, I want to get our money's worth. And then there are two things. Normally, when you get a delay or you buy anything in the trade world, you get what's called a standstill. The Mexicans have a standstill. That's an agreement from the president of the United States not to impose more tariffs. We don't have that. So we don't have a standstill, and we don't have a thing called a snapback. A snapback is if you don't trust the other side, it automatically punishes them with a penalty. Now, a lot of Canadians don't trust President Trump. So you would think the first thing that Canada would want is a snapback. So those are the things I'm looking for.
No, I don't necessarily need a snapback, but a standstill would be absolutely amazing, because every single mainstream media outlet is saying, well, Trump's just going to keep tariffing us if we agree to anything. No, if you enter into official negotiations and build that mechanism in there, and we know they're willing to do it because they did it with the Mexicans, you won't be subject to any future tariff. It's a complete lie what the mainstream media has been saying. They've also been framing these negotiations as official negotiations that Canada's in, and it's not. These are non-official negotiations. That's why they're not able to build in these mechanisms.
And why that threat was even able to be put in by the U.S. administration in the first place.
Well, and I'll say one other thing. In the very beginning, before Mexico went into the official negotiations, they made a ton of concessions to get into official negotiations and to build that mechanism in.
Exactly. Do you want to keep watching the clip, or are we done?
No, that's good for that clip, I think.
Perfect. So before we continue, please don't forget to subscribe. Again, it really does help us out. Do it now as we're going into comments. Hold on. Oh, thank you so much to Teresa Freedom for the $10 super chat, saying, hi, Nat and Guy. Did a lawn sign pop up on Sunday and had 4 people stop that wanted to talk. That's great. They were all in the mushy middle. We had good talks, and they're all going to look into everything we told them. Oh, that's great.
Well, and this is absolutely fantastic. And although I asked for a more hardline strategy from Alberta Independence, because that's my preference, they've taken a very good middling ground approach, starting conversations. And now this is going to really pay dividends for Alberta Independence. Why? Because everybody can see in Alberta, Canada is headed for a tariff war here, and it looks like there's no end in sight. The economy does not look good. Everything Alberta Independence has said has been truthful, transparent, and we've had those conversations, and we're going to continue to have those. I think the strategy Alberta Independence has used is really going to pay dividends now. Thanks again for the super chat. It really does help the channel.
Yes, and again, the fact that people are getting more and more curious about it, and even if they're in the middle, they want to continue to look into things afterwards, is a good sign that maybe finally some of the idiotic things that Canada and Carney have done are getting through to them, and the fact that it could impact them as well.
Well, and there is a major interest ever since Carney pulled out of the negotiations. Our numbers went way up, but the unacceptable fringe numbers went way up. I checked every channel in Alberta Independence. People from across Canada are watching it from different age demographics than we're normally used to. People are interested in what's going on in Alberta now because of what Mark Carney did. Mark Carney is the best promoter for Alberta Independence. We've been saying it for a long time, but this most recent action, my God, we couldn't have asked for a better promotion.
And to escape the sinking ship.
Yeah.
And also, Max from Freedom Calendar, thank you so much for the $10.24 super chat, saying we need to leave the Islamic Republic of the Dominion of Brookfield Ltd. And I would add there of China.
Absolutely. Nothing is good in Canada's future right now. We're looking at mass immigration. We're looking to strengthen ties with a failing alliance of the EU as well as China.
Not just strengthen ties, but maybe even prop up a failing European Union with our own natural resources. But first, not before, we nationalize them or federalize them, as we say, and become basically full-on communists.
Well, let me be a little bit more clear with my words here. Federalization in the context of what Mark Carney wants to do is actually socialism, and socialism is the fast track to communism.
Yeah, it's soft communism. But thank you so much, Max from Freedom Calendar. Again, go subscribe to Max from Freedom Calendar if you haven't done so yet. Anya Zinsky, hello, says hi, Nat and Guy. Thank you for being here. And let me scroll to where we were. Option Trader says, watch what CNLR and Suncor do. That will tell you how things go because they're the biggest of the 4 oil sands operators. Their financial situation will dictate how things shake out.
Yeah, and I'm glad you really brought that up because I have a diagram. I believe I'm going to put it on Wednesday's show exactly how the oil in Alberta is kind of divided up and who's invested in it, where does the money go, who owns the percentages, and that particular company is one of the big companies.
But thank you for that. And I know Option Trader is a little bit of an insider, so thanks. And Option Trader also says, Guy, I think you're onto something there. I'm watching out for federalization by Carney now.
Absolutely.
And watching their words carefully because they tiptoe around it. But as you were saying, even in the more liberal, decided think tanks and like spaces of YouTube, they're already talking. They've been talking about that for the past week.
Well, yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to kind of bring up. And we've shown the clip a couple times, and I don't like to keep replaying the same clips. The Mexican negotiation clip is absolutely crucial. People kind of get that through their heads. I hope people start bringing that up on other shows. But on the last show, I believe we showed a clip from a liberal saying, we're basically at war right now. We need to get our elbows up, and the only solution is federalization. This is coming directly out of liberal think tanks' mouths over and over and over again on YouTube. And if they're talking about it openly, this had to be the plan behind the scenes for a long time. And when they're asked, how do you get federalization? They said, well, we need a little bit of an economic collapse. So the provinces come to the federal government. The federal government offers bailouts for federalization. They talk about it openly. The problem is a lot of conservatives don't watch liberal media. And I know why, because it's a freaking headache. I hate watching it, but I need to know what's going on in those spaces.
And Holden says, Canada is past the point of no return. It is irrecoverable. There is no conservative willing to go far enough to save it. No, they're all just willing to kneel and say, oh, yes, we agree with you. Mr. Carney, elbows up.
The single best way to save Canada is to vote for Alberta independence.
Yes.
Period. It will be a wake-up call for Canada. It will give Alberta a chance to save Western values, what Canada used to represent before it started erasing its history and importing a new identity from other countries.
Ray Davis says Brookfield controls those very pipelines inside and outside of Canada. And they also have a lot of investments in other energy sectors that now might get a slight push from the U.S. actually going and diversifying to them, where Brookfield has also invested.
Well, the disgusting thing here is 91% of Mark Carney's investments lie in the United States, and he's going to get rich while he collapses Canada and gets federalization in Canada. He's going to win on both ends here.
Todd Talk says, I can never understand why when this cut off the energy lunacy is spouted, is not mentioned that fundamentally these are business deals.
This is absolute. I don't know if it is a business deal anymore. This is an ideological way for Mark Carney to get power, I believe.
Todd Talks also says illegal monetary reciprocation and penalties to stopping these contracts are quite staggering. And yet they want to threaten with it. I think they like to threaten with it and think that nothing's ever going to happen. And that the U.S. if the U.S. decides to actually take the threats of cutting off the oil seriously, and they actually end up cutting it off before Carney and Doug Ford apparently can do anything, well, then they'll start actually noticing what impacts it has.
Well, let's talk about
what could help them.
Let's talk about what the United States reaction is going to be to this when Mark Carney pulls out of these negotiations in a very public way. That's definitely going to have a small effect on the midterms, not a big effect whatsoever. And he wants it to affect the economy, but it's going to affect the Canadian economy in a far worse way. The Americans probably won't do much till after the midterms. They want to keep everything steady until then. But after those midterms, what I'm expecting is an announcement of a bilateral trade deal with the Mexicans where they transfer a lot of the stuff they're buying from Canada and they start buying it over the land borders in Mexico, number one. And then they give their 6-month notice to pull out of the USMCA. And this will keep market steady because of the announcement of the bilateral trade deal, which will probably come with the Mexicans, even though they talk about the cancellation of the USMCA. And again, once they announce that, it takes 6 months. But over that 6 months, you will see the absolute hollowing out of the Canadian economy.
Yes.
And that is what provides America with a ton of leverage. At that point, the Canadians will have to come begging for a deal. Otherwise, they're going to go broke.
And we're already seeing industries leaving Canada. We talk about it basically at least once a show. DeBilver says, hi, y'all. Hope you're doing well. Well, we are. And Alberta might be. Canada, not so much. But hope you're doing well as well. Freedom Calendar says, limited. Yes, sorry, I read it wrong. Sean says, hi, comrades. Hello, Sean. Thank you for being here. And thank you so much again to Freedom Calendar. Very generous for the 587. Always a very interesting number, dollar super chat saying, Indy, my Black Independence kitten is watching you. Hello, Indy.
Fantastic.
I don't know how to talk to cats. I've never had one, but
I've had a couple cats, but I'm allergic to cats even though I've had them.
He's allergic to a lot of things.
Well, I'm not allergic to our little French bulldog. I love that.
She needs a bath, though.
Yeah.
Don Nadalek says, hello, all. NNG, hello. Thank you for being here. And Up to Smooth says, oink, oink, here comes Doug Ford. Yep, waddling down.
Well, and we have a absolute ton of stories. I rarely have put this many stories in an episode, and I had to take some things out. One of the things I did take out was the massive statement Trump put out against Doug Ford, the pig himself.
We'll talk about it probably on Wednesday, hopefully. But now let's get into, now let's get into Alberta personalities.
But they need to understand that Albertans are done. We're leaving, and there's no more conversation to be had. I know that's upsetting to people.
And let's start with someone that is basically the exact opposite of that. Coin Bureau says, quote, latest Canadian Premier Patrick David Eby responds to Trump tariffs saying, I feel sorry for Americans. If you can't be friends with Canada, then you almost certainly do not have a friend anywhere in the world. And that is a very lonely place to be. Funny, because they have the whole shield of the Americas and more Latin American countries turning towards that ideology and wanting to cooperate with the U.S., but sure.
This is absolutely crazy. You don't need friends, you need trading partners, and everybody's willing to trade with the United States because it's the largest market on Earth. And that's number one. So friends are willing to trade with America, but even enemies are. Enemies that we have that the United States have sanctions on, if they are willing to lower those sanctions, they're still willing to sell to the United States because it's not about friends. It's about trading partners. But even when we look about who America's friends are now, they're realigning with the Western Hemisphere, Central and South America. They want to make Canada part of that game plan. It's in the documents they kind of put out, and that talks about those a lot. Yeah. Problem is, Mark Carney is an ideological puppet of the globalists, and they will not allow him to unify with the United States and this new strategy.
But let's watch Ball-less Eby.
I feel sorry for Americans. If you can't be friends with Canada, then you almost certainly do not have a friend anywhere in the world. And that is a very lonely place to be. I feel sorry for America.
He's not in kindergarten. He sounds like he's talking to kindergartners, or like he is one.
Well, this isn't Mean Girls. First of all, you can just look in Central and South America right now, whether it's Argentina, Chile, a ton of other nations. They're part of the Shield of the Americas. They're not only allies, they're ideologically aligned because they look at the United States, and especially the conservatives in the United States and the populist conservatives like Donald Trump, as friends. Mm-hmm. And as far as enemies go, even the enemies want to be trading partners with the United States. Canada can't say the same. They can say they have friends, but not friends that are willing to stand by them come hell or high water. And their enemies aren't trying to buy anything they're selling without a hard-nosed deal. And this was shown by the Chinese, who made a hard deal when it came to electric EVs in exchange for soybeans. Very short-sighted of the Canadians.
Yes. Speaking of short-sightedness, but on the opposite, we have Howard Lutnick, and we're seeing the contrast and compare and contrast here between Ball-less Eby and Lutnick. Wealth Moose says, quote, Howard Lutnick's broader point is being missed. Canada has spent years demanding privileged access to the U.S. market while layering on protectionism, regulation, and policies. Washington increasingly sees as barriers. Union statistics don't settle that argument. Trade is about market access, reciprocity, and leverage, and Canada's problem is simple. We spend far more on the U.S. market than the U.S. depends on ours.
And this was a little bit of an older clip, not that old, but it has a lot of relevance now. America is rebuilding its manufacturing. That's been obvious. Almost 19 trillion flowing into the United States. They're giving special visas, especially to Canadians with red seal certification, because they're building so many manufacturing facilities within the United States right now. 50% of all investments into Canada are actually mostly Americans buying up Canadian businesses. My guess is to hollow them out and move them to the United States.
But let's watch.
I mean, think about it. Why would a factory that was making cars in Michigan move to Canada? Because I tell you why. Because they did it because there weren't unions in these locations. We harmed American workers. I mean, think about it. Why would
And even if there was unions, the unions didn't have the same kind of regulations they did in the United States. I absolutely love what Trump's doing, but it's only going to work if they follow it up with another president like a J.D. Vance, who has the inside track on exactly what they're trying to do, what they've done, what the first round is, and what they need to do going forward. Trump they tried to freeze him out through the judiciary in his first term, and they were somewhat successful. The second term, he learned. He had 4 years to learn, and he's coming in there guns ablazing, but he's having to rule through executive order. We need to follow it up so we can turn those executive orders into legislation that are permanent changes for the United States.
Yes. But But also another name that keeps coming up is Jameson Greer because he was part of the negotiations. Josh Wingrove says, quote, U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer says Canadian Prime Minister Carney's statements that Americans were looking to curtail French language rights was a funny fake story. It was about Netflix, basically, he tells CNBC today.
And this is very interesting. Jameson Greer was the primary trade representative within those negotiations for the United States. Thing a lot of people didn't know about him, and he brings it up here a little bit, is he speaks French. His family speaks French. His wife speaks French, and his kids speak French. He's not trying to go after Canada because they speak French or wanting them to erase French. What he's saying is America is not going to pay for your French protective policies.
Mm-hmm.
You speak French?
I do.
So you don't care whether they change some of the language up there, whether they make it.
No, I mean that was a funny fake story, and I don't think that. I mean, I speak French too. My kids speak French. One of my kids was born in Paris, so I like the Québécois, and I like that they speak French. What we don't like is a situation where Canada, the federal government, forces American tech companies to take their earnings and give a percentage to their competitors in Canada. But I understand why the Québécois want to have French language content and all of that, and we think that's a really valuable thing, and we encourage countries to really put their own country first and put their national identity first. That's actually quite consistent with.
So what is that about then, Ambassador? There was some reference to the idea that we wanted some of it to be either in English or that English had to be first or something like that. True? Not true?
That is not true. I can tell you that's not true. I think that's just, I don't know what that is about. I mean, it's what I said. There are countries like Australia and like Canada where they go to somebody like Netflix or other streamers and they say, okay, you make X money, you're going to take 5% of that and you have to give it to Canadian content producers or Québécois content producers or Australian content producers, and that's what you have to do. And we think that's a tax, a discriminatory tax on American companies, but we have no problem with it.
And it actually goes 10 layers deeper than this. And we talk a lot about this, about the Granick Act, trying to protect free speech online. A lot of these social media companies, the majority of them all lie in America, and they have free speech that is constitutionally protected. A lot of these countries, like Canada, like the EU, like Great Britain and Australia, fine these companies billions of dollars a year. It's an entire industry. They make more from fining U.S. tech companies than they do off their own tech companies. And why do they want to do it? They want to control speech. So all these little things actually put strings of control on U.S. free speech and things like that.
But also, I will say the whole French language thing and the other basic, I would say, excuses, I think, are to cover up the deeper layers of the reasonings why Mark Carney pulled out. And we'll talk about this in the next segment, but it probably is because of the short-term and long-term deals that he's trying to solidify with China, and the U.S. doesn't want that, obviously.
Look, one of the big reasons I know this is about federalization, and I'm going to be shown to be right over time, and Mark Carney wants economic hurt for Canada so we can trade federalization for bailouts, is because these are pity-pat reasons. Oh, he's going after the French language, or oh, you're going after this. Nothing would make sense if this is why you're pulling out of your largest trading partner and putting economic collapse onto Canada, or potential economic collapse onto Canada, other than the fact he potentially wants it for federalization.
But lastly, over in British Columbia, the fires continue, and even at 10 years in, we don't know how to stop them. Antonio Tweed says, quote, climate change strikes again for the 10th time this year in British Columbia, Canada, and BC, saying a Kelowna man was charged with arson after the Knox Mountain fire. Witnesses reported a shirtless man near the fire and snapped his photo. Fire deemed a criminal act, and he was arrested.
And there's been multiple arrests. The majority of fires within Canada are either lightning strikes or man-made, and the ones around cities are usually man-made. Yet it's all they always want to blame the climate for it.
Yes,
and then they want to put carbon taxes and everything else.
Exactly, the fear mongering, but also the lack. It's useful when you can start a fire that easily, and you don't manage your forest, you don't clean the brush from the floor of the forest, and you don't cut brake lines, and actually do the ancestral techniques that used to be used by everybody before when we remembered how to do forest management. So this wouldn't happen, and this wouldn't be, kindling wouldn't be just laying around all over the place. But it's because it's a useful and convenient political tool. Well, they'll just let it continue happening.
Well, and they could cut brake lines thousands of kilometers long and actually sell that lumber on the open market and actually make a profit to prevent forest fires and reinvest that money. It could be a profitable thing.
Exactly. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe. It really does, again, help us out. And like the video, that also really helps the channel out. Thank you so much to everybody that is here. But now let's get into your comments. And thank you so much to Steve Safaro for the $4.99 super chat, saying my wife Trish loves fishing in Montana. I guess Alberta is a great vacation stop, but the trade BS has to be worked out.
Well, it'll become a much greater stop once Alberta is a free and independent nation. And relations with the United States will be vastly improved because we won't have the Canadian federal government standing in the way anymore. And man, I wanted some fish today. We were trying to go to a British little restaurant here in Mexico City. We already fled Canada, but it was closed. Everything here closes on Monday.
Yeah, well, not everything, but some things. Museums.
Most things.
Freedom Calendar, thank you so much as well. Very generous today, Freedom Calendar, for the $825 super chat. What?
I don't have access to the switcher today.
Yes, I know. That's why I moved. But thank you so much. Again, go subscribe to Max from Freedom Calendar. All great content, but also great interviews and talks with people. We've been on his channel as well. So thank you so much. And we have an interview with Max if you want to learn more from him. It's in our podcast section. But Max says Canada, Supreme Leader Carney, and Elbows Up, Woke Mind Virus, and the Islamic Republic of Canada are trademarks of Brookfield Asset Management Incorporated. I said it right this time. Exactly. And again, once you start seeing that all of these things do follow through one after the other and actually do help and implicate one another, well, and Steve Safaro, but thank you so much, Max. Steve Safaro says prayer has nothing to do with Carney. Their religion is communism. And exactly, communism is basically a religion because you have to fully depend on the state. That's why they would like to get rid of religion. Let's remember all the burnt churches all over the place in Canada. But I do agree with you. The title was the guy's idea. So.
Well, and part of the thing about communism, I mean, in the United States, there's a lot of pushback against it, which is a great thing because they understand the value of freedom. But in Canada, these socialist and communist policies and the mechanisms are being built right into legislation, and they have for 10 years. And Canada does not have the freedoms it thinks that it does. Private property rights are starting to become a thing of the past in Canada. They are moving head first into communism. You will own nothing and you will be happy was far more than a slogan, especially when it comes to Canada.
Teresa Freedom says Alberta independence will fix all that. Exactly, which is why October 19th is becoming more and more important. And it's encouraging to see that, I believe it was you or another subscriber, or you also said that there's people starting to talk and ask and actually be more and more interested, even if they were in the mushy middle. Now they're saying, well, this is getting serious. Like I'm actually looking towards that. And even before the trade talks, we had, what's her name? Jen Gerson from The Line, the conservative but actually liberal podcast, saying, I might have to move to the U.S. She doesn't want Alberta independence, but she's thinking of moving to the U.S.
Yeah, even liberals are thinking about moving to the U.S. at this point. They got their elbows up on the way out the freaking door because even they can see the economic collapse at this point.
Yeah, but those that don't see it or those that can't actually enact those moves because they are fully broke are going to stay and suffer in Canada alongside with the new Canadians. Jason Misk says EB's an idiot. Yep. And also says, I had enough of the liberal stupidity, nonsense, BS. I'm so angry because we're all going to suffer from this trade war. Exactly. And they're not. I mean, they're going to be able to benefit either by federalizing everything or by imposing emergency measures.
Well, especially when you don't see the Canadians enter back into negotiations in a quick manner. That is a huge tell that this has nothing to do with trade war. This has a long-term vision for what Mark Carney wants for Canada and what the globalists want for Canada. They want federalization and ultimately they want control of Canada's natural resources. He's going to bet everything on those natural resources, but not to benefit the provinces or the citizens, to benefit the federal government and the globalists. And that's why he's moving closer and closer to the EU, because the EU is not going to be able to take Russia's natural resources like they thought they were. And now they're going to eyeball Canada Canada's as the backup plan to float their globalist utopia dream.
Jason Miask also says, on top of it, 50% more tariffs in January. I'm PO'd, man. Well, yes, and we are for you as well. And I mean, today we were walking around and you were saying it's such a pity that Canada, such a beautiful country, is ruled by communist retards.
Oh, absolutely. We happened to walk.
Megalomaniacs.
We happened to walk by a bunch of these very large Canadian pitchers in downtown Mexico.
Yeah.
I don't know what they were there for, but there was about 6
Probably
of
the
them.
World Cup.
Yeah, and I said, "Oh God, how beautiful Canada is!" It's just a damn shame that ideology is killing the country, and it's the same story for a lot of countries and even a lot of states in the United States. California would be an absolutely fantastic state if they can get the ideology out of there.
Yeah. Jason also says, all I can do is shake my head. It's outrageous and nothing is going to be done about it. Well, we're trying. Alberta's trying.
Well,
Alberta's trying to leave.
There is something that
and
can
incentivize
be. There
others.
is something that can be done about it. It's not about Trump saving us or anything else. It's about Albertans standing up on October 19th and sending a message to Ottawa that we want independence, period. Even if they don't give us a binding referendum, if we can send that message that we want independence, we have the option of a unilateral declaration of independence if they play underhanded tricks. But we need to win this first round, send that message and let them know Alberta's oil and natural gas isn't a leverage point that you're going to play against the Americans. They're Alberta's #1 trading partner and friend.
And Steve Safaro says, Teresa, it's nuts how many U.S. citizens love visiting Canada and stopped with the Carney regime. I would even say before that, with the Trudeau regime as well. A lot of people said, no, they're getting a little bit too out there for us.
Yeah, but Trudeau was far out there, but this elbows up campaign is just venom spit at the United States that has done nothing but help Canada for well over 100 years now.
And Yazinski says, I see that more commercials on YouTube are in French now. And then for a while now. And again, it'll continue to ramp up. But that is just the excuse. I mean, the deeper layers go far deeper. Towards China. Teresa Freedom also said, and the EU. Teresa Freedom says, I think they're all right to stop coming to Canada. I cannot wait for Alberta to be out of the woke country.
Yeah, absolutely. And once Alberta gets its independence, people are going to breathe a sigh of relief. A lot of people are staying in Alberta right now, where you're seeing conservatives from the rest of Canada hit the border about as fast as they can, because Albertans believe in independence and they want to be a free and independent nation. We're this close. We just have to show up on October 19th.
And continue to talk to each other about this is huge leverage for anybody that wants to talk and maybe even try to convince people that might be on the fence or still thinking about it. Say, look at what's happening and look at what the effects might be specifically also for Alberta. Even though right now it's not being affected, if they do decide to cut off the oil or do something else that's retarded and stupid, imagine the impact on Alberta and the people in Alberta that work and produce.
There's a good chance a lot of people that want to move out of Canada, if they see there's a real chance for independence in Alberta, they will move to Alberta first to help vote for freedom.
I mean, if we were still there right now, but thinking what we were thinking back then when we actually left, we would be there already. Hold on. Todd says, hey guys, way to kick as per usual. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here. And Steve Safaro says, Mr. Hockey Gordie Howe was famous for raising his elbows to protect himself, deliver a hard check in the corners, signaling toughness without necessarily dropping the gloves first. Yes. And hold on, just one more. Jason says, show us a deal that Carney... Show us a deal, Carney, and let Canada decide. Imagine if we could know what was going on. But we don't know. And there's a lot of rumors that the whole trade deal and Carney leaving the trade war or starting the trade war with Trump is because of the French language or multiple other excuses that we are continuously seeing. But it might actually be a lot deeper than that. So let's actually get into Canada's downfall.
I've had enough of these people.
And let's start with this from Michael Lucci saying, quote, this sounds a whole lot like Mark Carney wants to prioritize his, quote, strategic partnership with a really bad Chinese Communist Party over the USA. And that's been the story all along.
Well, and these series of articles we're going to have really dig deep into the relationship Canada is building with China behind the scenes, that they thought the Americans were dumb to what was going on behind the scenes, how they were smuggling billions of dollars of goods into the U.S. The Americans are wise to this, and they're saying no more.
The U.S. introduced in the last hours, efforts to restrict our ability to have other trade deals. You heard me say a moment ago what we've accomplished in the last year, 20 new deals, economic and security partnership. The prospect of doubling our market access because we believe in free trade. We're the partner of choice in many respects for countries around the world, and the Americans wanted to restrict that. They had language that they wanted to restrict. Unacceptable. The U.S. introduced
hold on. He says unacceptable. This is already actually within the USMCA contract. We're going to show that in a little bit. But number two, the one country America has a problem with is China. It's their number one competitor. In order for Mexico to get into official negotiations, it had to start kicking out a lot of Chinese manufacturing. It had to make concessions. It's not to say everybody that the United States has a problem with you can't trade with, because that's not the case. Mexico is currently closing a major trade deal with Brazil, which is a key figure within the BRICS organization, but it's not China. And usually where Mexico would go for their oil is Houston and the United States, but they're deciding to go with Brazil. And the Americans aren't putting up a big fuss with it because the Mexicans have showed good faith by starting to get rid of Chinese manufacturing in the country. The roadmap is there for Canada. All they have to do is look at Mexico.
Well, meanwhile, Carney was going over to China and actually reinforcing and redoing all the trade deals with China as the U.S. was saying, hey, come to the table, we actually have to talk. And Canada was saying, no, we won't. But CBC Watcher also says Mike Froman, former U.S. trade representative on CNN yesterday afternoon, saying, I think the issue is that the Trump administration is pressing Canada as well as other countries to adopt a common approach vis-a-vis China.
Yeah, and it's obvious they're making a common approach against China. You can look at anybody in the Shield of the Americas, Mexico being a perfect example.
And Argentina, too, for example.
Both parties. But issues like the Canadian dairy system has been a bone of contention between the U.S. and Canada for decades. And I imagine it continues to be one today. I think the new issue is that the Trump administration is pressing Canada as well as other countries to adopt a common approach vis-a-vis China, whether it's a common external tariff or export controls or ensuring that Chinese products, inputs, don't get inserted into products in Canada that will then be imported into the United States. And that's a new set of trade issues, and Prime Minister Carney has noted that goes against their sovereign right to establish relationships with other countries. So that's going to be an issue of contention that the administration is going to continue to have dialogue.
And again, this is the lie the Canadian media keeps putting out, whether it's through interviews or from their own mouth. This was already in the USMCA. It was already agreed to. They're acting like this is something new. Absolutely, it's not. And when your main trading partner has a problem like they do with China, you better get on board or you're going to find some economic hurt in the future of Canada.
And so the French language thing and it's the Netflix thing or the this and the that, I mean, those might have been sticking points, but the main thing probably is the weird and closer relationship that Canada continues to try to build with China and the EU.
Well, I think it's China is one of their big masters, as well as they want federalization. So they're going to they want to have some kind of benefit while they decouple from the United States, or at least try. And that benefit is economic collapse, but at least the federal government will get federalization so they can adopt a Chinese communist model, because federalization is socialism and the road to communism.
Basically, but also from RMC86 as a quote to everyone indicating that the U.S. has no right to tell Canada who they can make a trade deal with. You're wrong. Article 32.10 of the USMCA stipulates agreements with non-market countries cannot be made without strict advance notification and review. One guess which country is non-market that Carney made a secret strategic partnership agreement with. So it's not about sovereignty, as Carney continues to say, but it's also about following the trade deal you're already in, and you continuously say that you want to stay in, but apparently you don't.
Well, and again, they don't have a problem with you trading with other countries. It's only China. Typically, you would think it would be Brazil as well, but the Mexicans are now dealing with Brazil, and the Americans have absolutely no problem with it. Especially, you think they would have a problem because typically a lot of that business went to the United States, and Mexico is trying to diversify a little bit, and America's not putting up a fuss right now.
But also, Mexico did impose more tariffs because Mexico had a huge problem, for example, with dumping of Chinese electric vehicles. And yet they did go ahead and impose tariffs as soon as they did want to start the more serious trade negotiations with the U.S. After all the talk and the blabber from Claudia Sheinbaum, they actually, and sovereignty, her saying sovereignty, they actually did go ahead and do the things that they needed to do to actually start enter into official trade negotiations.
Well, Trump actually did Mexico a favor by saying, get rid of the Chinese manufacturing. It was something that was not politically tenable for the president to do here until the pressure came from Trump. And then she had the excuse to do it. And why wasn't it a good thing? Because 90% of the products were being made and assembled in China, shipped over here, and just the finishing touches were being put on here. Then they were slapping a made in Mexico stamp and shipping it over the border. It wasn't end-to-end manufacturing. Now what we're seeing is American as well as Mexican manufacturing end-to-end, meaning a lot more work for Mexican workers.
And also this coming from the White House themselves. Wealth Move says, quote, Canada was accused of allowing Chinese steel and aluminum to enter through Canada and reach the U.S. market in ways Washington viewed as tariff circumvention. When the U.S. pushed for tougher transshipment rules, Ottawa reportedly resisted. It was a major issue, a major reason the deal collapsed. Then this isn't just a tariff dispute. It's about whether Canada would align with the U.S. or China, and Washington clearly does not want the Chinese trade workaround sitting on its northern border.
Well, also, this is a ton of money behind the scenes. People don't realize they're dumping massive amounts of steel and other products within Canada, and then they're shipping them across the border. And they think America is not wise to how much illegal importation of a lot of these goods are happening through Canada. It is the #1 violator of any country in the world, that being Canada.
And again, they've continuously done studies like this, and this was recently published as well, interestingly, right before Canada finally decided to sit at the table for then to say, no, we actually walk away. This might also be the reason. DMAX says, quote, the people doing the most celebrating this weekend about the Canada-U.S. trade deal falling apart are on other countries.
Well, and this is so freaking true. And that's Ursula von der Leyen kind of pictured there, the head of the EU, and Xi Jinping. And the thing is here, Canada doesn't have any leverage, but they do have two puppet masters to say, the little leverage you have, you're going to use now before the midterms. We don't care if it's your economic collapse. Figure it out. Mark Carney's all too happy to do it.
It says, who's our good little leader of the middle powers? I don't even think they're the middle powers. It's the middling powers, at least Europe and Canada.
Yeah, China would be one of the main powers.
Which is why we don't want them. I mean, the U.S. doesn't want them just freely entering through the northern door, I would say. I was going to say back door, but same thing. And lastly, South Rider Gal says, quote, oh, Canada. China has been stealing more than $60 billion in tariff revenue by laundering its exports through other countries. The biggest offender is Canada, and Mark Carney walked away from the trade talks to avoid upsetting the CCP by ending the scam, because he's very proud about all the deals and the diversification he has done lately, mostly with China.
Well, and the reason China's not willing to diversify more openly, because they have all these behind the scenes deals of $60 billion where they can dump things into the United States. When it went from soybeans to electric EVs, these are pity pat deals. All the big deals are the black market deals that Canada has with China right now. And it dramatically hurts the United States, especially when the United States is trying to reshore and bring back manufacturing, which they're doing successfully right now.
And Muzak said, Canada left China's steel backdoor wide open. The U.S. requires melt and pour in North America, so Chinese steel cannot get light processing in Canada and enter as North American content. Mexico accepted the rule and raised tariffs on Chinese steel and auto parts. And Mark Carney walked away from the U.S. deal.
Yeah, and this is cheap pig steel that is not good for a lot of products. And this is why products today aren't manufactured as good as they used to, because the quality of the steel, also the quality of lumber and things like that.
Exactly. So the actual reasoning as to why Canada walked away, Canada hasn't been transparent. Mexico has been trying to, every time they go into trade negotiations right after, they post something and they actually inform the public. Ironically enough, Mexico is being the transparent country in this case. But with the U.S. saying one thing and Carney saying another one, well, the deeper truth might be just sitting across the world with more interests for Canada, but not with the U.S. Before we continue, please don't forget to subscribe. It really does help us out. And like the video as well. Thank you so much. But now let's go back into your comments. Hold on. Let me find them. Here we are. Teresa Freedom says, oh no. Was just saying hi to Todd. Steve Safaro says, elbows up is a hockey reference, not politics. Exactly. But it worked as a strategy for him. So, up to now, for at least
But it's a slogan with nothing behind it. Elbows up so we can make our main trading partner an enemy. That's what you're implying here. At least make America great again, which originally came from Ronald Reagan and then Trump adopted, actually has meaning behind it. Let's literally make America great. And you can see he's doing that by reshoring, bringing back manufacturing, pushing back on the globalists. If he had another term, it would be a done deal. This is why we need to get J.D. Vance in there, because if the Democrats get in there, they're going to try to do all the great work he's done over the last 4 years.
And thank you so much, Steve Safaro, for the $4.99 super chat, saying Meta is building a major 1 gigawatt, I guess, scalable higher AI data center campus in Sturgeon County, a multi-billion-dollar investment. It uses closed water loops.
Yeah, and we talked about that. It's a $13 billion investment in Alberta. But do you think that might not be leveraged by the Americans to pull out? I mean, Dana White, who's one of Donald Trump's best friends, is on the board of Meta.
Interesting. Obtuse moves, but also goes to, sorry, let me go back to your super chat, but also goes to prove the point that with Alberta independence, everybody was saying nobody wants to invest in Alberta if there's talk of independence. This is when a lot of the investment is actually coming into Alberta. I mean, with this as an example.
Absolutely. And one of the things I talked about, and I'm glad Steve kind of brought it up there, was it was a closed loop water recycling. So all the water wasn't being dumped back out, which was absolutely fantastic. A lot of people don't like data centers, but a lot of the things that they were building within that data center were far superior than the data centers even built in the United States at that point.
And Obtuse Moves was saying, sorry, I skipped over it, that Scott Bessent knows what Carney is up to.
Trump knows, Carney knows, and if you don't think there's repercussions, just because nothing might not happen before the midterms, directly after the midterms, I'm expecting a bilateral announcement for a Mexico-United States trade deal, and then a cancellation of the USMCA, which they have to announce, and then 6 months later, it takes place. Over that 6 months, it's going to be all kinds of pressure on Canada to come to the table, because if they don't, it's economic collapse at that point. Who has all the chips at that point? America will have even more than they did beforehand. Because Trump wanted to get a deal, he offered a pretty good deal. A lot of the details are kind of being smuggled out from the U.S. side now. And why would he want that? Because maybe things in Iran didn't go exactly the way he thought. It would have been a little bit of an economic bump to get a trade deal with Canada, even though he doesn't want to deal with the globalists. The best deal Canada could have got was going to happen before the midterms. They wanted to play games and try to affect the midterms.
Which they probably won't. Again, most people in the U.S. aren't even aware that this is going on. Or aware of Canada.
They're hoping it's going to have an effect in the economic market.
Yes, I know, but could it have an effect this quickly?
Well, it's going to have an effect on the Canadian dollar. I already watched it today. It's dropped.
Well, no, for Canada, it's going to be horrible. But for the U.S., I mean, it does take a while to see positive and negative effects. And we've noticed that ever since all of this tariffs and the trade and the stuff, we are seeing some of the positive impacts now. But a lot of people for the first year were saying nothing's going to happen. This is a terrible idea. And now we're seeing that, it's not as bad as people
They're hoping it's going to affect the northern states in the midterms, which I don't think it's going to have the effect they think it's going to have.
No. Which is why they want to cut off the oil. Jason says we need him to step down or be fired. Carney failed, period. There's your evidence, liberals.
Carney's not stepping down until the country is destroyed, period.
Until he's king.
Yeah.
He'll step up. Tal Talk says, if the U.S. hating leftist quote-unquote theorists want to be right, nationalize the U.S. oil companies in Canada, there will be Blackhawks and Abrams in Edmonton by noon the next day. Well, we saw it, and we saw what happened now in Venezuela, so I wouldn't fully doubt it.
That's basically a threat of war.
Yeah. And Jason says,
but they don't have to send in Blackhawks and things in, because Canada will never do it, because their voting base and the people they actually care about is all the Laurentian elites, the people in Quebec, the people in Ottawa, and ultimately that oil's in Alberta and it goes through the United States to get to those individuals. They won't cut it off.
Jason says it's going to be crazy expensive. Yep, get ready. Start saving up. And if you can, not financial advice, but find other ways to not have your money in Canadian dollars.
Well, if you don't live in Alberta, now is the time to bail, because the Canadian dollar is about to collapse. The economy is going to get bad. There may become a point in the future it's going to be financially untenable for Canadians to leave Canada. And that's without an exit tax.
Exactly. Like, not moving advice, I guess. Freedom Calendar says on October 20, there will be lots of baby making in Alberta. Hopefully so you can actually replenish your population with Canadians and not have to import a bunch of people.
Well, absolutely. And hopefully they'll be born by the time the binding referendum comes around.
Oh, that'd be cute. Southeast Maximus Hello says, how's it going? What's going? What a gong show in Eastern Canada, in all of Canada, but yes, particularly in the East.
Well, particular in the East is the one that's making the decisions for all of Canada. And this is why Canada is too big of a country.
Exactly. And Jason here says Eastern Canada is screwing the rest of Canada because they don't see the rest of Canada as it's just their colony.
Well, and Eastern Canada has no leverage over the United States. That's why they want to use the West. The West needs to send a message. You will use us no more. You've used us for over 100 years now.
Exactly. Southeast Maximus also says that thing is Eastern Canada has been programmed by the COVID lockdowns and have bought into the elbows up movement.
Absolutely.
Full on, yes. And Southeast Maximus says Liberals developed the elbows up gimmick months before using it with focus groups. They plan their attacks months ahead. Yeah. And this was, I'm guessing, a very researched strategy, especially seeing back then when he wanted to be selected.
They need everybody's elbows up, and they need everybody to say, we have to put Canada first. Both the Conservatives and the Liberals have to come together. So when they pitch federalization and bailouts, everybody's going to be cheering for it. And they're going to be cheering socialism and communism coming into their country. They're going to be voting for it if it's put to a vote as well. And this is the problem with Canada. Again, they're so indoctrinated.
And you enter into communism through voting, you have to leave through bloodshed.
Yeah.
So don't enter into it. Southeast Maximus says if Doug Ford had a nuke, he would have used it already. He's unhinged. Oh, yes, he is unhinged. I mean, I guess he can go run and kind of try to sit on the U.S. That would be basically like a nuke. But let's head into Alberta and the world because there's still a lot of news. Slow rolling there, but we made it. Let's start with this from Eric Doherty saying, quote, just an overnight, President Trump is ripping Canada for acting like it deserved the privileges of a state without being one. 50% tariffs are on. And now he also ripped Doug Ford, which we'll talk about probably on Wednesday. But says Canada wants the benefits as being a state without being one. They have also charged our great farmers for many years. Massive amounts of tariffs, no more.
And Canada was literally treated like the best trading partner in the world. And it was treated like one of its own. It was treated like a state. And it could have continued to be that. It was offered the best trade deal. A lot of things are leaking out now. And I was actually shocked at a lot of the things that were supposedly within that trade deal. After the midterms, it's not going to be a nice, easy deal with a bow on top. Canada should have taken it. Mark Carney has other plans for Canada, I think. But Donald Trump's absolutely right with this statement here, and especially the one he gave to Doug Ford, which we'll bring up on Wednesday's episode.
New tariffs on some Canadian goods went into effect overnight after last-minute negotiations stalled. President Trump sounding off.
We imposed historic tariffs on foreign goods. The tariffs were making a fortune with tariffs. And what it's really doing, even more than that, all these companies are now coming and building in the United States. $19.2 trillion is being invested right now in the United States, more than any country at any time.
It's developing rapidly, and now Canada is firing back. Alex Hogan has the latest on that and much more live from the White House.
And pause it. And that $19 trillion that's being invested in the United States, primarily for a lot of manufacturing, a lot of the companies in Canada have already been bought out by Americans. They're looking to relocate.
Hi, Molly. Good to be with you. So we know about these trade talks collapsing overnight. Now, the U.S. is imposing these new tariffs on Canada. It is going to be 50% on $20 billion worth of Canadian products. This was earlier today when we heard the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, speak about all of this, criticizing some of this fallout, saying that he walked away from negotiations because his country simply could not accept this latest deal. Carney says that Canada will match those tariffs dollar for dollar starting on September 8th.
And pause it there. Actually, you can leave it. That's almost the end. When he says dollar for dollar tariffs, they're going to bring back, that's not to put a hurt on the U.S. What it is to control the economic collapse of Canada province by province. He can choose which provinces are going to collapse by choosing what to tariff and what will hurt each province more than other provinces. This is going to allow for bailouts for federalization to be exchanged. I believe the last two provinces he's going to leave is Quebec and Alberta, because those are the most Christian, number one, but number two, they're the most independent.
And yet, there's a clip that you were talking about of Carney apparently having no clue about anything and yet bragging about it anyways. As Relevant says, quote, less than 1% of American semiconductors are from Canada, but Mark Carney says we supply almost all of them, and he's hinting at cutting them off. Go ahead.
And this was crazy because he doesn't expect these kind of clips to get out, and he talks a lot different. He has his guard down and he's bragging. It's almost, he's trying to give an elbows up rally here. It almost sounds like to the people in the bar. And I had to check this. I wanted to make sure. And yeah, it's 0.5% to 1% of semiconductors that the United States use on an annual basis come from Canada. Mark Carney's making it sound like almost 99% come from Canada. It's a direct lie. And if he thinks he's not going to be on camera, he has no problem giving a bold-faced lie. Hell, even when he's in a press conference, he has no problem.
I mean, he did it earlier, saying, oh, it was the French and the sovereignty and this and that.
Biggest supplier of semiconductors. We supply almost all their semiconductors. That whole, everybody in the White House is a tech bro except for Trump. They all need semiconductors. They all come from Canada. Maybe they won't. Maybe one day they won't show up. We'll see. You'll see what they're doing. Biggest supplier.
Maybe they won't show up. And then he said that about the Albertan oil as well. Yeah. Oh, what, America is not going to like it if the oil just doesn't show up one day. We showed that. That was the first clip on the show. He's threatening semiconductors, which Canada doesn't provide 1%. And he's acting like it's almost the entire manufacturing line. And then he's threatening oil and natural gas. And he's pretending again that 90% of the oil the United States uses comes from Canada. It's not 95%, it's 65%. And America is diversified into Venezuela and it has other partners it's currently courting to diversify as well.
Well, with the semiconductors, could it be that maybe he's just thinking out loud about the fact that China could use Canada to bring those into the US, especially now that there is even more harshness with regards to semiconductors and China, Taiwan, etc.
No, he's giving an elbows up rally at a freaking bar is what he's doing.
But could he have been, misspeaking? Yeah. I would Freudian slip, I would say. Saying the quiet part out loud. Who knows? Well, the Moose says, quote, Canadians gave Ottawa enormous leeway to negotiate behind closed doors. That was understandable while talks were active, but the deal is dead now. So release it. If Mark Carney walked away because of the terms were truly unacceptable, Canadians should be allowed to see what he rejected. Exactly. Mexicans can. Canadians can't. And
again, I just want to put another point here. The Mexicans give daily readouts on their negotiations, so you can see exactly what they're negotiating. Mm-hmm. As well as they have clauses built in, so they're not subject to future tariffs or threats of tariffs from Donald Trump. And the Canadians could have easily taken the same path. It's intentionally why they're not. It's been over a year, and the Mexicans have already gone forward with this plan. The Canadians can completely see it, yet they're deciding not to do the things that have worked for a apples to apples comparison, because both countries are subject to the USMCA.
And that's the ironic part, that there is a comparison point in Mexico and the way that they've been handling the negotiations. Even as Claudia Sheinbaum, the president, yells about sovereignty, they have continuously had the actual formal talks. They have been able to come to the table, actually deal with the U.S., and Canada has continuously, number one, not even entered the negotiations, but number two, gave excuses without telling us what's actually happening.
We're also hearing more reaction from the opposition.
Pause it for a second. What I forgot to mention on that last Fox News report, you see them when and this was across the board when I was watching American news kind of report on it, and it was spotty, the coverage at best, but when they reported on it, it was just very analytical and there was no emotion involved. But every time I watch Canadian mainstream media, it's very emotionally charged. You can just feel it coming off of the reporter themselves.
Because they're scared S-less.
Yes, from Chevalo Majumdar. He's the trade critic for the Conservatives. He sent an open letter to Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc, pledging support in the fight for tariff-free trade with the U.S. and agreeing that it's better to have no deal than a bad deal. One-sided tariffs cannot be accepted, he says. But he does point out that the collapse of negotiations will have serious consequences for the economy, and therefore he makes this ask, and here's part of that letter. I am requesting that your government release the full details of the proposed deal from which you chose to walk away on Friday evening. If there was a draft text of any agreement that both governments have seen, please release it. The U.S. administration has seen it. Your government has seen it. Canadians deserve to see it. And he says that he's not asking for any negotiating secrets. I should note, Natasha, that we asked Lisa Raitt if she thought this was a fair ask, and she says that it was. That the
And
Canadians
pause it again. And again, in all the negotiations Canada has conducted, they've been conducted in secret. Mexico's have been opened with daily readings. And the reason Canada wants to have secret meetings is they control the mainstream media. They control and they can leak what comes out. And this is why the Elbows Up campaign has been so effective. They said Trump was the one not coming to the negotiating table. And then what did we hear 6 months later? Well, here the Mexicans leaked out. The Canadians never showed up, so we didn't have the same leverage that we thought we were going to have. Then the Americans leaked the same thing, that it was the Canadians that never showed up. And then the Canadians finally had to admit to it. But that's 6 months after it already happened. Well, people have their elbows up above their heads.
Given the government a lot of leeway during negotiations, understanding that, details were not going to be made public. And now, though, that there is no deal, that the Canadians deserve transparency.
CBC's Karina Roman in Ottawa. Thank you.
And they can't because then it would come out what has already been kind of leaking, that one of the major reasons was because of that diversified partnership, strategic partnership with China that Carney keeps talking about. But now, before we continue, please don't forget to subscribe. Again, it really, really does help us out. And thank you so much to everybody that has subscribed and like the video as well. That also helps us out. But let's go back to your comments because there is quite a few of them. So thank you so much.
We'll get through all the comments and then we're going to go over to RUMBLE. That's usually where we end the show. And if we have any stories that are too spicy for YouTube, we want to avoid the censors. That's where we put them.
Teresa Freedom says, Guy, did you see the letter PP Pierre Poilievre sent to Carney asking to call the House back? The White House back or the House?
The House, so they can talk about what was in that trade deal and why they pulled out. Yeah, that was one of the earlier stories we covered on the show. The Canadian government or the Canadian people deserve transparency. Hell, the Mexican people are getting transparency and their government is completely corrupt. The reason the Mexican government is being so transparent with the people is in case the negotiations went south, they want to be able to show it's not our fault. We did our best.
And
Because
again,
people here don't trust the government.
No.
Unlike in Canada, there's
Exactly.
complete trust of the government. When it came to jibby jabs, Canada was one of the countries that had the biggest uptick on compliance.
And again, saying transparency in Mexico is an oxymoron,
Yeah.
but in this case, it's making Canada look even worse. Steve Safaro says, I don't know why I said it in that cadence. Steve Safaro says, Southern Alberta farmlands are shared with Northern Montana's dryland farming. Cross-border roads access the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been a lot of talk in a free and independent Alberta because there's a lot of farmers that are within the movement talking about how we distribute water out from the mountains for farming to make Alberta even more of a powerhouse when it comes to farming and to benefit our neighbors to the south.
Yes, and Steve also said, continues, the U.S. and Canada are joined at the Alberta and Montana via farming. In October, Montana residents should also vote in Alberta's referendum. No, because that would invalidate it, so actually don't do that. But, I mean, it is a good point about how interconnected specifically Alberta is with the U.S. I don't even think, for example, BC is as connected with Washington and like all the other states that are at their border, but Alberta and the states that border it are connected quite a bit.
There's all kinds of pipeline deals just waiting to happen to connect Alberta directly to the United States. They're offering one that goes through Washington State. They're also offering another one that could connect to the Keystone pipeline, not Keystone XL.
Mm-hmm. And Option Trader says it's mind-blowing how Canadians mindlessly follow anti-American rhetoric. Again, it's been enshrined, instilled, and injected into them with propaganda for the past, and it's been a long time. It's not just within the last few years. It's been decades, I would say, at least 30 to 40 years.
We don't buy into that propaganda on this channel. We understand Alberta needs its independence. America represents freedom, is protecting free speech, while the rest of these Western countries are turning their backs on Western values.
Upton Trader also says Canada has 4 dairy products that have 200 to 300% tariffs on American products. Lower those tariffs. It's that simple.
Yeah.
But it's that scary for the Laurentian elites and everybody out east that actually benefits from it being this way.
Well, they're gonna trade the Canadian economy for a communist ideology here. Federalization for bailouts. That's what's coming, not just for provinces, but for citizens as well. How do you think they're going to get a digital currency and a UBI? That's a universal basic income into Canada. That's going to happen through an economic collapse. And they want people to vote this stuff in or to cheer it on. They want them to cheer on federalization. That's why you have the Conservatives saying we have to have a Canada first approach. We have to come together. The Conservatives aren't even pointing out the mistakes of Mark Carney's negotiations at this point.
And 300-mile-per-hour Martyr says, medic, more boosters on Isle Canada. Yep, and they probably we need to start doing CPR as well. But over on our UMBLE Real Fringe, hello, says, good evening, you lovely freedom fighters. Hello, and says, Quebec can... I have to say it after on our UMBLE. And yeah, says, Mark the Clown Carney, this is going to be a big fight for our independence. We want our independence. Everyone will benefit.
And people in Quebec, I rarely talk to them anymore, but they need to stand the frick up and grow a backbone because your PQ is now betraying you. They're saying, vote me in, and we're not going to have an independence referendum until after Trump's gone, after federalization has taken place. It's absolutely ridiculous what's happening. And the Quebec independence movement has put its faith in politicians when they should have done what Alberta did and put faith in citizens, a decentralized movement.
Real French also says Carney probably has some tricks up his sleeve. I wouldn't put it past him. They will have some dirty tricks to try and screw us in Alberta because Alberta is that existential threat if they leave, because all the leverage also goes with Alberta when Alberta becomes independent,
Look,
which is why I think everything's going to be on the table to stop it.
Look, we're going to take the legal path we have before us, which is a non-binding referendum to a binding referendum. And if he wants to not allow that binding referendum to take place or to try to evaluate it afterwards, what we need to do is be prepared to make a unilateral declaration of independence. And I say it on the show quite frequently, and I have a lot of pushback from people saying, oh, you shouldn't talk about that. Well, the fact of the matter is, if we don't talk about it now, when it comes time to do it, Albertans aren't going to have the backbone. And we need to be prepared for that moment because the direction Canada is going right now, this is an existential threat. The Alberta economy will absolutely collapse along with the rest of Canada if we don't stand up for ourselves right now on October 19th and then when that binding referendum comes. And if it's necessary, a unilateral declaration of independence.
And also because they keep threatening to use Alberta's oil, which once again was already signed away, it's not Canada's oil, as leverage for their stupidity.
Well, it will be Canada's oil if Alberta continues to go along to get along and goes along with this idea of federalization for bailouts, which is coming.
Real French also says Canada left Alberta long ago. When are people going to wake up? And I think this has helped again as we hear there's more conversations, hopefully amongst yourselves, amongst people that might be on the fence. Maybe they are waking up with the insanity that is going on. And it's just more and more leverage for Alberta independence every single time Carney opens his mouth. And Doug Ford.
There's two independence movements happening that really have legs in Canada. I'm not talking about Quebec. I'm talking about the Alberta independence movement on October 19th. But I'm also talking about all the conservatives, especially young conservatives that live outside of Alberta right now. They're voting for independence with their feet and they're moving to the United States, to Mexico, and to other countries. We already did it. We lived in British Columbia and there was no Alberta independence at the time, or it didn't have real legs under it. People, especially after what's happened over this last couple of days with Mark Carney, going into a trade war with the United States, people are seeing the writing on the wall. They're going to leave now before it's too late. And Alberta has the chance to take the province with it.
And again, in just 2025, more than 120,000 Canadian Canadians left, and also a bunch of PR holders because they also see the mess that's going to happen to them, and that already is. Real French says Emergency Act, sheesh, and says I know Danielle Smith wasn't serious about Alberta independence. Wonder who her handlers are.
Yeah, we can't trust her. I know she keeps saying the spring now. If they lie, she wants to avoid a leadership review and then saying, oh, we have a court challenge. It's going to be another couple of years. If you're willing to wait more than 6 to 12 months, even 12 months is too long at this point. Federalization will have happened at that point.
And KP4U says, I haven't been a fan of hers, Daniel Smith, for quite a while. It's like she's invested in carbon capture, just like Brookfield Data AI Centers and her latest Alberta Digital ID system, rug pulling Alberta.
We need a binding referendum after this non-binding referendum within 6 months. And why? Because Mark Carney, if the economy starts to collapse, he can declare the Emergencies Act at that point, and we'll never get a binding referendum. This is why we need to push for it. And if we trust in Danielle Smith, we're signing away our independence at that point.
And again, I do think she has her eyes set on Ottawa already and trying to further her own future. But now we're heading over to RUMBLE. But before we do so, while you're here, don't forget to subscribe. Again, it really does help us out, and like the video as well. And also thank you so much to everybody that sent super chats today. Teresa Freedom, Freedom Calendar, Max, and Steve Surfaro. Thank you so much. That also really helps out. There's a 30-second wait screen. We'll see you over at RUMBLE. Our channel name for there is here. The show's not over. We're just going elsewhere where we can speak freely.